And I'm very honored to welcome Elizabeth Turner to present that. Elizabeth is a senior manager of technology at TPG Global and has worked at the intersection of IT and finance for over 15 years. She is also a corporate librarian with expertise in knowledge management and serves as Smithsonian Library's appointee to the International Federation of Library Associations Knowledge Management section. Outside of work, she's a retired professional ballet dancer who still trains in her pointy shoes at home during COVID. So Elizabeth, really honored to have you here and share your journey with us.
Thank you, Jose, for that introduction. It's wonderful to be here this morning, coming to you live from my house in the Dallas-Fort Worth area in Texas. So I guess I'm very close to people like Monica who are coming in from Dallas, and the people coming in from far away, Tasmania, Finland, such a wonderful global audience today. Let's go ahead and dive right in. We're going to talk about visualizing change and how we're going to tell the story to our business stakeholders, other technologists, knowledge workers, everyone on the team, and really help to get the message across by using process modeling. So Jose, as you described, I am coming to this with a perspective of not only a project manager, but also a librarian. And so I kind of embed techniques for information management along the entire life cycle of the project. When I'm not at my house, normally I work in this tall building on the left in this picture. That's our Fort Worth office in Sundance Square. I kind of miss it. It's nice being downtown, but it's so nice being home too. So let's go ahead and dive right in. We're talking about business process documentation today and how that is useful to you over the life of the project. So process modeling, process mapping, documenting processes. Honestly, this is such a powerful tool. If you are a project manager, a business analyst, maybe a team leader, along the way, you are trying to make a change in your organization, and a lot of these digital transformation projects can get confusing, right? We're trying to build a bridge from where we started and where we're trying to go. So sometimes to be able to lay everything out on paper and visualize what is really happening, what is our current state, where are we trying to go, how do we kind of make that change happen? Using process mapping can really help you, kind of bring the stakeholders to the table, show them what you mean instead of describing, or getting into difficult concepts. Just lay it out for them. I've found a lot of success in getting people to actually agree to a course of action once they see it kind of, put out there in a picture. It's so much easier to understand. The old adage is true: a picture tells 1,000 words, and that's certainly the case with process mapping. As you go about your initiatives, sometimes, if your organization is very large, you may have a dedicated role, people who are responsible for documenting processes over the life of those processes and how they change. But sometimes we're not so lucky and we have to make do with the resources that we have. And so I recommend that you have at least one person on a project who is able to kind of put these concepts to paper and help keep track of the process as it evolves. Myself, as a project manager, I have taken on that role. Sometimes I'm lucky to have an analyst or a technical writer who can come alongside me and do that modeling as well. But I think it's important to remember that the project manager's role in all of this is to help facilitate conversation, right? We're bringing people to the table to make decisions. So we want to make sure that all the appropriate stakeholders have actually seen the model, they understand the model, they're able to ask questions and able to reach an agreement about what business problem we're trying to solve. And sometimes that can look like a big dramatic change, right? Retiring legacy systems, upgrading technology and infrastructure, going to the cloud. But sometimes, there can be nuance. And so having these things spelled out makes it a lot easier to understand. At TPG, we use a product called Signavio to help capture our business process library. So the examples that I show today, including the one that you see here, do come from Signavio. And they'll just be kind of sprinkled throughout the presentation, because what I want to do is take us through the project lifecycle and show how process modeling can just kind of weave throughout the life of the project and help you tell the story, even as the story is being written and as it evolves. So let's take another look just at some process modeling basics. So as a quick introduction, the notation that we use for process modeling is called business process model notation. This is a widely accepted notation, almost like a language that can be universally understood, right? Not just from, employee to employee or business to business, but even has potential for process automation because it is machine readable. So some of the basic concepts of business process model notation, or BPMN, which is what we abbreviate it to, just some of the basic concepts, right? So you've got, objects that appear in your flow. You have a start, a start to your process, an end to the process, all of the activities along the way. You can see in this example here, we actually have a timer indicating that activity is happening on an occurrence every week at a certain time. You can also indicate decisions that have to happen, or human interaction or judgment calls that have to take place for the process to proceed from step 1 to step 2. Also, on this particular example, we are calling out documentation that is relevant to the process. In my work and experience, we also refer to systems as well. So it's helpful to spell out who is doing what is it they need to get the job done, and how are these things taking place, either against time or in a sequential course of action. A few decisions that you can make before you put pen to paper and start to capture things. The majority of business processes that I work with at TPG are internal, right? I'm in the services function of my organization in the back office, so my clients are internal, and all of the players in my process are private within the corporation. You may have an abstract process where you're interacting with the public, and this introduces a little bit of complexity, a little bit of uncertainty, because we don't always know, right? We hope that the public will interact with us through, kind of stated channels, right? Like maybe a form on our website, or, kind of a key conversation with their account representative, but that's not always the case. So sometimes when we're working with the public, our processes become a little bit more abstract. And then we also have global processes, which indicate a collaborative nature across teams or organizations. So some things that you can include in your processes that we sometimes forget about, right, are, the routine work that has to happen, say during a financial close process, or, the basic course of accounting or HR. Sometimes there's task-driven work that kind of goes back, and it's, it's a rote process, very consistent, very similar. Sometimes it's easy for us to gloss over these things and just, maybe refer to them without detail or without context. So I want to encourage you to actually include some of those routine activities in your process mapping, because sometimes those can be great opportunities to discover efficiencies, potential automation, or honestly determine the course of change as you embark on your digital transformation. Knowledge work is another area that sometimes gets kind of overshadowed or forgotten. Don't discount the fact that your workers are having to use their own expertise and their own knowledge to make judgment calls, make decisions, interpret data, make recommendations. It's important to depict these so that we understand kind of the behind the scenes activity that's happening. And then finally, resource constraints. Sometimes, we put things on paper and it looks great. It looks like we're moving from point A to point B, but we can easily obscure the fact that sometimes we are dependent on, a single point of failure or limited resources to accomplish a certain activity or goal. And it's important to, notate that or comment on that in the process itself, so that when you take this picture together and start, explaining it to an executive audience, a vendor, some of your extended team that may not be as familiar with those constraints, it's very important to depict that you may be encountering these conditions of scarcity. There are some limitations to business process modeling notation. It doesn't have a great innate way to depict your entire organization structure. So probably not the tool of choice if you are, trying to put a big org chart together. I'm sure you could attempt it and try to make it work, but ideally, right, we're talking about an actual business process taking place within the organization and referencing some of the players that are involved, but not every single individual in the company, right? And then another area where, sometimes BPMN may not be the most robust choice would be with data modeling, right? So, extensive layers of data and their source systems and all of the attributes that we're accounting for. That is a little bit beyond the scope. We can certainly refer to master data management and data-driven processes in the model, but overall, we're trying to keep a kind of a simplistic picture of start and end and everything that's happening in between, including people, tools, technology, and information. All right, so let's talk about how this kind of aligns to the project life cycle. This particular methodology that I have listed here is the VPIC, Visualize, Plan, Implement, Control. I've heard a lot of different terms for all the different phases of a project over my career. I personally like to use the VPIC methodology as a simple framework because it's based on the Stephen Covey model, and it's just very easy to understand. So my own interpretation of this is up at the top, right? I like to begin a project by asking a lot of questions. We really want to make sure that we understand who the players are, what are we trying to accomplish, what business problem are we trying to solve, and how are we going to align this to some of the firm's key goals and objectives, right? That's very important because it can really make or break the success of your project, right? If you can align the work that you're setting out to achieve with your digital transformation, if you can align that to, overall operational efficiencies or your organization's plan to avoid risk, your organization's plan to introduce growth and change, or maybe, you are trying to innovate and get a new product to market, get a new team engaged, get a new system deployed, whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, kind of being able to state that in the language of, the mission and vision of your organization will overall lead to success. And I think it's important to capture this in our layers of information that we put in our processes as well, especially when we're discussing our business processes. So next up, we have plan. We're going to walk through each of these phases and kind of talk about what it means for your model. But the next phase here is really about capturing all of the answers to those questions and getting them in writing so that people understand not just what we agreed to do, but how we're going to do it. And so when we're in that planning phase, it's important to make sure we have a good understanding and definition of all of our information sources that existed in our environment before the project begins, and then in the future state after the initiative is over and we transition to kind of our normal state of operation. So don't discount some of your non-document, some of the people that are involved in your project. Sometimes they carry that information in their heads. And so we want to make sure that we're accounting for them as experts or subject matter experts in our project, so that we've accounted for them and we know how to get to them, especially during key critical milestones. Maybe we need to also understand who their delegates might be in case they are a primary decision maker, but they have a backup. And then also who is able to support when they are away from the office, or maybe they're on vacation, maybe their schedule doesn't align overall with our project schedule. So making sure that we have all the right people identified and on our roster will also help us target what message are we trying to convey to whom at which point in the project, right? Stakeholder communications are such a key component of project management, and it's very important to make sure that we aren't over leveraging our subject matter experts, our SMEs, right? And we're over dependent on them to kind of explain things and break things down, bringing them to every single meeting to answer questions, that we've collected the information that we need, we put it down to paper, and we can share it throughout the rest of the organization, and then come back with those particular questions and details, and engage our SMEs when we meet. And then the next phase is, our implementation, and this can look like the traditional design code unit test, the D-cut activities that are happening on our project. But also it's about letting people know about the change that's coming. So this could be engaging your testers and making sure that they have everything they need, and making sure they understand how their testing aligns to the overall picture of the process. It also makes sure that when we're training, that the folks who are going to have to change their ways of working understand what it is that is expected to change and what it is that's expected of them, so they know exactly what they're supposed to do. The implementation phase of the project is a great time to assess not just your information management, the tools, the systems that you use. Maybe you're retiring a legacy system and it's going away. Well, we need to make sure that the new solution is spelled out in terms of, how will I engage with the new system? What kind of protocol do I need to follow? How is that different from the way we did business before? And this is a great layer to add to your process modeling so that people understand. The other aspect of your implementation is the organizational change management, right? So this is about the particular process impact. Maybe we interact with customers in a new way. Maybe we have removed some steps from our process, and we need to make sure that everyone understands how things will look differently than they did before. And then finally, after everything is said and done, and after the go live and the launch party, the champagne toast, right, from achieving this transformation, now it's time to actually capture the results and show how you demonstrated success and brought value to the organization by achieving all those things that you promised to do at the outset, right? This is the time to produce a quantitative data about metrics, to get the product out to your pilot groups, your beta groups, and to determine what future phases of the work will look like. So let's go ahead and take a look as, step by step at each of these phases, and start thinking about that modeling exercise and how it will evolve over the life of the project. So our first phase, we talked about initiation and how to align to the business and its mission and objectives and key initiatives. This is also a great time to identify your sponsors as opposed to your actual hands-on resources, right? Everybody in the project is going to play a different role, and we want to make sure that everybody understands what their role is and what they are responsible for in terms of bringing success to the project. So these are some sample questions that you can ask yourself, but even better is if you can demonstrate the answers to these questions in the model itself. So let's talk about that a little bit in terms of your model maturity. So project initiation is a great time to start visualizing the before and after. We want to talk about the current state in explicit detail, right? What are the pains or challenges that we're trying to resolve? Bring this with you to kick off and show, what the proposed state looks like, so that people can start to have that image, right, and imagine and visualize the future. This can really help with getting that solidarity and kind of team commitment, because you are all seeing the same image and you're all sharing the same vision of success. This is also a great time while the project is new to think about the terms, roles, systems, tools that you'll be using and referring to again and again, not just in this project, but other projects. Signavio has a concept called the process dictionary, which is where we can actually stage organizational departments and teams, refer to some of our common systems, and then over time, we start to see all of the different processes that are impacting those systems or vice versa, right? And then that becomes a very powerful tool for ongoing change management because it helps you assess the full extent of the change and the teams and the applications that may be impacted by that change. We talked about getting the players on the board. This is also a great time to talk about, okay, what are we not committing to do? Actually, drawing a box around the things that are not in scope, so that we can speak to them when we are asked questions about them later. So lots of work up front, but it really does pay off later. Moving on to the project planning, right? Even more questions to ask yourself. And as the PM, you may be putting together all of these concepts, thinking about the requirements that you need to capture in paper, thinking about the resources that you need to align to get things done, thinking about your overall project goals and direction and how you're going to continue to get that message across. What can you capture visually to help your audience understand whether you're talking about critical dependencies? Yes, you may have a milestone plan to refer to, but sometimes it's helpful to point back to that diagram and show this part of the process will fail if we don't have this dependency in place. And then the reverse question to pose is, this part of the process will be scalable or more efficient if we have this groundwork in place, right? So it really helps connect the dots for the rest of the team. Speaking about planning, there's so many collaborative tools out there. There's many more types of plans than just your project plan. So when you are thinking about all these different types of planning, you have your timeline, you have your stakeholder communications, but think about testing and training as well, and how you're going to bring that picture of the process to those groups and what they need to know in order to successfully test and accept the changes that you're making, and then also what needs to take place before the final launch. Some of the things that I have personally used in my career to do status tracking or collaboration with my team, it could be a task management tool like Rike. It could be traditional tools like Microsoft Project. I could be engaging with my development team and they live and breathe in their DevOps solution. So I need to be able to kind of draw that picture from, what is this particular body of work? And then how is that going to show up in, in the DevOps queue, in the backlog, right? You may be transitioning to support after their project goes live and the transformation has taken place. In my organization, we use ServiceNow. You may have Jira, Atlassian products, other types of ticket tracking and service management applications. But don't forget to refer to these in your end-to-end diagram, because it is kind of the next chapter, after all the dust settles and things are said and done. We mentioned, of course, that Signavio is kind of the library of our processes and where these models live at my organization. But in addition to your business processes itself, we talked about how you can embed that system layer. And sometimes, adding the data implications as well. Even though end-to-end, BPMN is probably not ideal for all of the nuance of your master data management strategy, and governance and kind of all of those data-driven focus points. What it can do is show you how attributes can move from one system to another, how they change, where they change, where they're introduced, and who consumes them. So these are some things to keep in mind that can add really helpful context and kind of help you translate the different flavors of impact to the extended team. Okay, so thinking about our project plans and how we're going to capture it in terms of our process model, This is the time to really focus on the future state. We've already told them the story about what the pain is and why we need to make the change. Now we need to get everybody to kind of rally around this picture of where we're headed, where we're trying to go, and make sure that we're in agreement and have the appropriate approvals before we actually get down to do the work. Let's make sure that we have captured any kind of limitations, any kind of team changes that may need to happen. These are very important. If we previously relied on a certain team or individual to complete a body of work and their duties and the scope of their responsibility is changing, this is a great way to convey that in the layers of your process model. So you can actually take the same model and continue to share it over and over again, and it becomes bigger and bigger. Or you can introduce the concept of layers so that you are really tailoring your message and your picture to the appropriate audience. This is a lesson that I learned, and it was refreshed in my memory recently, because I realized that, while I had one diagram that made a lot of sense for the working team, and we were able to rally around that and kind of make decisions about, who needs to do what, that same message was entirely lost on an executive audience. And so what we needed to do is bring them up a few layers. You can see in the picture here, those generic concepts of the process overall. Sometimes that's the best place to start, right? Because you don't want to lose your audience. You want to make sure that they're on board. You want to make sure they have that full understanding and awareness before you take that next step and go, one layer deeper. So the next layer is really the way of working and what is it that needs to change to introduce that future state. And then finally, you have the actual, what is happening in development? What is it that is basically introducing that change to the organization? I use subflows in my diagrams to actually set aside processes that we are going to touch, but we're not necessarily going to change. So for example, if I have a, vendor invoicing and billing project, right, that I'm trying to transform, I may import those invoices and that vendor information in a new way, but the way that I release statements and cut checks, that process may not be changing. So I want to refer to an existing process, and I'm going to use a subflow to kind of daisy chain those processes together and make sure that people understand, what am I bumping up against? What am I touching around the organization, even though I'm driving in my focus on this particular set of steps. Okay, so that's more than meets the eye. We asked a lot of questions in planning. We put a lot of things on paper, got a lot of tools involved, got all of our teams involved, and now we're trying to get the message across to all of those different areas of the organization. So now, implementation. This is the time. This is the time to let people know what is it that they need to step up and do differently than they did before, right? When is the actual change taking place? Everything is coming together here. So before you launch, before you go live, go ahead and think about, okay, what were all of those information sources that we listed at the beginning of the project? Are any of these obsolete now? Do we need to announce that they are no longer valid because we're moving to something different? We have refreshed protocol, procedure documentation, run books. Think about all of those things that might need refreshing, and make sure that that is accounted for. For the testing team, very important that they have a good understanding of their old way of working, and then if they're going to test, they need to make sure that they are aligning to kind of the new process and have a great understanding of what's different. When you are doing training delivery, bring your model with you. Remember what we said about tailoring the message to the audience. Sometimes starting with that big basic picture and then starting to drive down to the next layer, sometimes it's very helpful to start with those universal concepts and then kind of take them to the next level, show them the systems and players that are involved, and then show them what is going to happen in the future state. Remember that obsolescence needs to be accounted for in your project as well. Then let's look at what it is that is going to impact our model. So we're talking about getting ready for prime time. We talked about refreshing this documentation, but make sure that people actually understand on the picture. If you are taking this to your testing group, make sure they understand, oh, this is my name attached to this scenario. I need to make sure that I fully understand it and that I'm ready to give sign off. Make sure that there's a strong sense of conviction with all of your stakeholders, especially your sponsors. This can be a huge gotcha sometimes on a project because you've done the work, you've got the core team engaged, you're ready to start exposing the concept of change to a larger group of users, but we need to make sure that everyone's on board. And so this is a great kind of sanity check to make sure that those executives understand where we're headed. Don't forget that your layers can contain nuance. So the tangential elements to your process, like the systems involved, have you captured the decision making that needs to happen live? A great example of this, we had a project where we knew that we were retiring the legacy system. We had that in our roadmap, and so our future state made absolutely no reference to it because it was going away. Well, this was a 2-year project, and over the course of the project, that decision was reversed, and this legacy system got extended another year, right? It's a common story. It happens at a lot of organizations. But that postponement meant that we literally had to go back to the drawing board and make sure that that system was now reflected, that that team was now engaged. And even though it was taking place very late in the project, we were still able to kind of get them on board and get them to that level of understanding by just showing them the diagram and making sure that they could step through it with us and understand where their legacy system was going to be involved. Okay, so we've gone live. The project is out there. People have been trained. It's day 1, week 1. We're in production. This is the time to start thinking about how you're going to tell the success story throughout the organization. And it's also the time to think about succession planning. So when the support team comes online, who's going to own this model after all is said and done? What happens if we come back 6 months from now and we realize that something's not working the way we intended and we need to go back and make a change? This should absolutely be part of your go live checklist and kind of the post planning that you do, especially if you are about to head into an audit review. Internally, for a lot of our major initiatives, we actually sit down with the audit team, review all of our documentation, but we always start with the model itself, because that gives them kind of that bird's eye view of what is changing, what happened, why should they care, what systems are in scope, out of scope, and whose role will now look a bit different, right? Because these may be points that they want to cover with the external audit team as well. And me coming from finance, that's a huge part of our role as PMs, right? Is getting prepared for that. So think about what layers your audit team, your approval team may need to see. Can they read it? Can they understand it? So thinking about this is the time to layer on any kind of risks and controls. Your audit team may give you those examples or ask questions. If you can actually show them, in this example, you can see some of the attributes in bright green and yellow. Those are where dollars are involved or at risk, or where people are involved, or limited resources may be available. So you don't have to clutter your map. You can actually toggle these attributes on and off so that that layer is only present when you want to show it. This is super helpful for me when I'm delivering training, because I can start with the basics and then I can add that next layer and start to elaborate on these concepts and make those details known. Okay, we have covered a lot. We've gone through the whole entire life cycle of the project. We talked about, how to account for information management, and we've also talked about how to depict, these decisions, these impacts in a picture so that people can understand. If I could leave you with one thing today, I would make sure that you always remember to ask questions. And you always remember to capture notes, because you never know when those might be needed to share with others and help them understand change as well. Thank you guys so much. Okay, Jose.
Fantastic, Elizabeth. Fantastic. So we have questions that came in during your presentation, and I'll pass those on to you. But there was one on specifically more about the materials. A couple of people asked if they could have a PDF copy of your presentation because of just kind of the flow that you showed. Is kind of a systematic approach on how to do it, and if that's available, so I'll provide the answer on that. If it's available, Elizabeth, we can send it to them as part of the follow-up email that we have with the recordings of the sessions. So if that's a possibility, there is a request for a PDF copy.
Well, that's fantastic. I'm very, very flattered. This is a semantic model. I mentioned that I layered it over the Covey method, but the semantic model was actually something that I developed back in 2015 to deliver to International Federation of Librarians back in South Africa. So it's been published in a book by IFLA, and I've shared this many times. Let me work offline to get you guys kind of a clean PDF copy, and we'll see if we can get that shared out to folks as needed.
Terrific. That would be great. That would be great. So the first question that came was from Mark McDonald, and Mark was saying that in today's environment of remote work, how have you accomplished mapping a significant process via remote methods? And maybe just talk a little bit, what is the dynamic of doing this work remotely now, and what maybe have been some of the critical lessons learned about doing remote process development like that?
Absolutely. I think a lot of us this year realize that remote work is here for the long haul. So we better be prepared to adapt. And sometimes, you know, where we used to get in a room and have a whiteboard session and draw things out, those times are changing, right? So we need to be prepared to use our virtual tools to connect and collaborate together. So one of the things that I actually do when I am in the very early stages of modeling is I like to use tools, you know, a lot of us are using Zoom now for video conferencing, right? Or, you know, GoToMeeting, or, you know, all these web conferencing tools. A lot of them actually have a whiteboard feature. I know Zoom does, and I love using that because I can share my screen. I can drive as the modeler and start to add concepts to paper, but my participants can actually take, you know, like a little pencil or a little text box and start collaborating with me, and, you know, they can X something out if they don't like it, or, you know, put a question mark if we need to go back and drill further. So my answer to Mark here would be, don't be afraid to work out loud. You know, sometimes it's tempting to like keep things to yourself until you've got it looking perfect, and then you want to share that with others. This is messy work. This is creative work. We're brainstorming. We're putting concepts to paper that, you know, maybe we've only verbalized before. So this is a great time to work out loud. Don't be afraid to bring people into that collaborative process. Even if it's taking place over a VC or web conference, you can still, you know, put pen to paper together. You know, some of my creative ways of working, right? Maybe it's a happy hour after work and we're doodling cocktail napkins, right? That concept hasn't changed. You know, make it fun, book it later in the day, grab a beer, get together to start sketching how that process is going to work. You can do it remotely. We all can.
Very good, very good. The next question comes in from Antonio Urquiza, and Antonio asks about the benefit of the people who are currently using Visio. You probably hear this often, right? Lots of people use Visio for the basic process mapping. And so what are the additional capabilities provided by having a formal BPM tool like the Signavio tool? And, you know, there's an intelligence in there, but what is the value add from that?
Sure. Yeah. So in my organization, you know, Signavio is one of the tools that I administer. And so I have my new users or potential users coming to me a lot. And sometimes they ask me, Liz, what is Signavio? What is this tool going to do for us? And I say, well, it's Visio on steroids. And I say it like a joke, but for those of us who have struggled with, maybe you weren't so fortunate to even have Visio in your organization before, and I've seen people have these laborious like PowerPoints where they're trying to like put all these diagrams and squares, and it's a very manual. It becomes a very time invested effort. And some of the benefits that we've found by transitioning from Visio to Signavio, a couple things. I mean, some of them are very practical, like a licensing model that overall gives us the ability to distinguish between modelers and then collaborators, right? So this allows, kind of a key resource to be the one putting pen to paper, but then our executives, our testers, the other folks who need to see it, but not necessarily be engaged in the same way, they are able to come in and layer comments, suggest changes, get involved, but they don't have to actually sit down and have that full seat, right? Whereas Visio, sometimes those models, they have a specific file type. You have to convert things to PDF, you have to send them around, and then you come back and then you're back to the drawing board. So Signavio gives us a few things that kind of elevate that experience. I mentioned the dictionary in my a moment ago, and that is so key, because for us the concept of reusing the same systems, the same teams across a lot of different, your process library is going to grow and grow, especially as you take on extensive efforts for digital transformation. So being able to reference kind of those key concepts over and over instead of drawing them again and again, it saves you time, but it also gives you that integrated visibility into how these things are affected by all of your processes. So that's been a pretty powerful differentiator for us. I'm sure the great folks at Signavio would love to talk you through some of the other benefits. I will say the quick model is actually a form that you can sit down if you're interviewing maybe a stakeholder, and you can like type in their answers and it will start to draw it for you. So some of the gains there, very time saving and efficient. It looks cool. It's kind of a nice looking interface. People like it, they relate to it. And then finally, BPMN is a machine readable language. So that's where the power is really coming into play, right? Because using this common language gives you the ability to automate some of these processes by invoking some of our very powerful workflow systems like Appian or ServiceNow.
Very good, very good. So Rasma Burian asks a question related to this. And when is this level of process modeling useful versus when it's not really as useful? Where is the best use for this type of level of process modeling?
Sure. So it's more useful than you think, right? And more applicable than you think. Everything that we do, is either happening sequentially, tangentially, relies on a decision, or is based on time. And those are kind of the key, concepts that really indicate that this is a process. It's repeatable, and this is something that we want to capture. Some of the instances where I think it may not be as useful is, of course, if you're making very sweep, you're doing a reorg, right? And so the entire makeup of the organization is changing. That's not necessarily a process, right? That is a huge transformation, maybe a digital one if you're starting to, invoke robotic process automation. But this is really about how the organization is structured. And so I think BPMN may not be the best solution for something like that.
Very good.
So where we have a mix of people and technology and our ways of working, right, that suggests a process. And that I think is fair game for process modeling.
So a very quick one here, because we're out of time, but I want to make sure that we capture this one from Anna Martinez. She asks, I use Visio as a tool available in my organization. Would you consider Signavio to be an RPA tool?
I do think that it's a springboard for RPA. It doesn't actually, provide the automation itself, but it does have some advanced decision making and kind of corporate intelligence tools in the suite. So I think it's definitely something to check out, especially if you are advancing to RPA in your organization. We are as well at TBG. and we rely on Signavio to help us understand where that type of automation is necessary and where it's best served.
Excellent. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us today, sharing your expertise in process modeling and the applications that you're having. It's been a real pleasure.
It's been great, Jose. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Ladies and gentlemen, this completes this segment, and you do not want to miss our next presenter, the global leader for change and transformation at Google will be with us, Travis Haler. Travis is going to be presenting on the neuroscience of change from a world leader in that area, which is Google. And we're going to have the privilege of not only participating in his presentation, but engaging him on a live Q&A at the end. I look forward to your engagement. I look forward to your questions as we resume at the top of the hour. As we close this session, fill up the survey with any feedback on this session or the event as a whole, and we'll see you back up at the top of the hour. Thank you.